Yeah.
I feel like I did.
Yeah, well,
I just wanted to.
I don't know if you didn't get that impression, but I just want to make it clear. Hey, Sean, would you like to join us? We're about to do a podcast.
All right.
Oh, yes.
What's that?
I was mapping out where the Glenlivet.
Oh, yeah.
Jesus, Richard,
Let's not lose anything important here. We could lose Sean. Don't lose his scotch.
could you try to look respectable for Christ's sake? Trying to do a goddamn show here.
This is a professional.
Messing up our mojo.
Yeah.
Jackets on, jackets off, going to the bathroom, not going to the bathroom.
Yeah.
Jaeger?
I can't decide on anything.
Okay.
Oh, you're drinking Jägermeister?
Oh, you can have some of that
Oh,
as well.
no, it's
We had an
terrible.
experience with Jägermeister the other night.
Yeah, she
Did
had never
you?
had it,
I
so
did, yeah. So we decided
Ah.
it was a must do.
yeah, I can't
That's
stand
that's
it.
a
It's
that's
like
a weird thing to decide.
No, but I can't.
Yeah.
I was trying to introduce it to some public here last point. Everybody was like, I'm from Germany, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We are too. Are you ready,
Anytime.
Sweet Pea?
It's fine.
Okay.
Okay.
Sean's pulling himself together.
Okay.
Oh, for the love of God and the sake of Pete. For the Pete of sake.
5, 4. It is filming, right? We're just gonna fucking. It's starting now. It started 3 minutes
The
ago.
alphabet now.
Have we started drinking yet?
Well, yes, indeed.
Okay. Welcome, friends.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Make a Believer Out of Me. My name is Jim Eliason. I'm with the San Diego Coalition of Reason. My co-host sitting across from me is Sean Taylor. He is with the Secular Humanist Fellowship of San Diego. We are joined again by Dr. Richard Carrier, who was on the show with us previously. Thanks for joining us,
Sure,
Richard.
thanks for having me again. Yeah.
Last time that he was here, he had done a debate with Trent Horn on the historicity of Jesus, and his book is here on the table on the historicity of Jesus. We got a lot of, we had 150 people attend that debate, and we got a lot of feedback on that, so we thought since he was in town again that we might go through and talk about some of the feedback that we got and address some of that. So I'll let Sean start.
Oh, no, I'm going to start.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, well...
There are more important things to handle.
Because I was told that
They were going
By
to be.
somebody of authority,
Sean went
no
ahead
doubt.
and bought a whole extra bottle. of
That's
Glenlivet.
right.
Oh,
Well, we
yes.
finished the other one last time. So.
And I'm dry, so I
The show went longer than it recorded last time.
All right, here we are. Glenlivet, 12 year. Nice one.
Okay.
All right, proceed.
I think I might have. Apparently, I should have told you earlier. Glenlivet did not pay us for these episodes.
Which is a damn shame. And
Yeah.
Glenn, if you're listening.
We are not a representative for Glenlivet. Or any of the other alcohols behind us. We're just fans. All right, so there was a lot of challenges, a lot of questions, a lot of praise, a lot of nonsense from many people for on the video of your last debate with Trent Horn. One of the things that was actually a common theme on here, the historicity of Jesus, as you know better than most everybody, is not an easy subject to just talk about in an hour
Yeah, right.
or two. so we decided to do something a little different with that debate. The format was you didn't give an opening statement, premise, conclusion. There you go. Now rebuttal. Trent Horn had read your work, had looked at your stuff, is obviously familiar with the subject, and so basically the debate started off with just him attacking your positions.
Yeah.
And we should make clear to those people who are watching who are not familiar that Trent Horn is with Catholic Answers, and he was arguing for the historicity of Jesus.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And a lot of people on here, as well as you yourself, had all. If you haven't watched it, please do. It's a great debate, really enjoyable, and everybody agrees Trent Horn was a great opponent.
Yeah.
A great opponent. He went through a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
He was not ignorant on the subject.
Right. He paid attention, and
He
right.
did.
It was good.
He took notes.
Yeah.
So an A for Trent. And what some people had a problem with is they haven't read your book.
Yeah.
They're not a scholar on the subject themselves. They might not have even read the Bible.
Right.
As most believers haven't.
Well.
So they were a little confused. It was clear that both of you knew things, but they didn't know what you were talking about.
Yeah. Right.
So I don't know if since it's not something that you can do in a 15-minute opening statement, would you mind just maybe doing it in 5 minutes right now? No. What actually is your position? Because there was a lot of confusion. A lot of people here said, "I can't believe this guy. He says that there's no possible way Jesus existed."
Right. Which is not what I said, but yeah.
So good.
Unlikely. These are different probability terms.
Yeah.
Unlikely and no.
So that one's
way.
done. There goes 200 comments. But maybe explain your position on it and how you came to it.
Well, just first
For
to address
any of
that,
this.
because we touched on that a little bit on the last episode,
Right.
where I didn't expect him to do that. So I think that was a bad decision on his part in terms of causing exactly this problem, because he was confusing the audience as to what he was even talking about. In that sense. What I expected him to do is just make a straightforward defense of the historicity of Jesus, and then I would rebut.
Right.
But instead, he decided to do a rebuttal to my book, which is kind of like bringing everybody in the conversation halfway through.
Yeah.
Right? And just as a debater, I wouldn't do that normally, even if I was on the other side of the aisle on this debate. So that was really the cause of that. If he'd just done a defense of historicity, I'd done a rebuttal, people could have followed that easier.
Yeah.
But since he had the first opening statement, he framed the debate, so I had to basically debate what he was presenting. And then I had to do it under time, so that limited my ability to try and tie things together the way I would have had I just presented my theory, for example.
Right.
So there's that aspect of it, but the general idea of it is that you can explain the origins of Christianity without a historical Jesus if you suppose that Jesus originated as a heavenly being that people only knew through revelations and through secret messages in Scripture, the same way, for example, Mormonism was caused by the angel Moroni, right?
Right.
Like the teachings of Moroni and so on. But obviously there's no Moroni, right?
Right.
But
Sorry, Mormons.
But it's crucial to the truth of Mormonism.
Grow up.
Right, but the historicity of Moroni is essential to Mormonism.
Right.
And same for Islam, it's the angel Gabriel. The Quran is actually the teachings of Gabriel, not Muhammad.
Sure.
Just wrote down what he said.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
Or so he says. But and so if you suppose that Christianity began the same way, that Jesus was like Moroni or Gabriel, and then the first people to originate the religion were the apostles, the first apostles, like Peter, for example. And then so they preached that for a while, and then eventually, decades later, people started creating historical narratives that would allegorize their gospel by making Jesus into a historical person, and that's the Gospels we have. And then it was later that certain sects started believing those stories to be true, literally true, rather than allegories. And then that sect is the one that controlled all documents that would survive the Middle Ages. And so that's the hypothesis. And then the question is, does that hypothesis explain the evidence that we have better than the traditional hypotheses that are available? And I think it does, but that requires explaining how.
Okay. One thing you mentioned that I think a lot of people, even that might be watching this episode with you, still don't realize. You mentioned decades later that
Yes.
these were written decades later.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I run into that a lot. Like I keep forgetting that
Most people don't
have this basic knowledge. Even atheists often don't.
Yeah, no, yeah, true.
Although they tend to have it more than religious people do.
Yeah, statistically speaking, factually correct. Yes.
Like
So-
your average atheist audience, you can expect maybe a fifth to a half of them probably know the historical chronology of the New Testament. The rest do not. Whereas a religious audience, probably almost no one probably knows the historical.
Yeah, almost every religious person I speak to says, these are eyewitness testimonies.
Yeah, right. And they think they were written first because they're in the Bible first.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
So first the Gospels were written, and then Paul went along evangelizing after this.
Right.
And then wrote these epistles. No, it was the epistles came first, and the ones that are authentic. That's the other thing, is a lot of people don't know that a lot of them are forgeries, and that's the mainstream scholarly position. They agree, yes, most of the epistles in there are forgeries or late documents, or can't be established as early.
Real quick, because this is something that confuses, I noticed in the comments confuses a lot of people as well, and most people are not aware of. You mentioned that many of Paul's letters are forgeries.
Yeah.
And that is the consensus among the scholars.
Right.
Obviously, you're just talking about atheist scholars.
No.
Well,
all
commenters disagree.
Yeah, all non-fundamentalist scholars.
Got it.
So no, there are many Christian scholars who agree with this
Right.
View and begrudgingly admit it, and in fact have even tried to invent apologetics for it.
And why?
Because they need them to be true.
No,
Why
not
do-
the apologetics. No. Why do they have to admit that some of these letters are in fact?
It's because of stylistic analysis primarily, and it's also some ideological analysis as well, where the letters have completely different ideologies. So it's a different guy arguing for a different religion, essentially.
Could he not have just changed his position?
One could argue that, but then you have the stylistic issues to deal with, and there's no way, because there's aspects of authorial style that an author can't disguise. It's just innate in the way that you write, like your average sentence length, how you use adverbs, what word order you use. Certain ways you use words are distinctive of your style, and you're not even consciously aware of it.
Yeah.
And the way you use words, like the certain, because words can have different meanings, and certain authors prefer certain words to mean certain things than other authors. So there's lots of different ways that you can do stylistic analysis and show, for example, that Colossians and Ephesians were definitely not written by the same author as the seven authentic epistles, or as they're so called. And the pastorals, like the 1 and 2 Timothy and Titus, are definitely not written by the same person. And in fact, the things in there reflect views that appear to be second century views in the church. The writing style matches the way Christians were writing in the second century, not the way they were writing in the time of Paul. So there's a lot of these kinds of things. Bart Ehrman wrote a book called Forged that's a really good summary of the answers, the reasons why all scholars agree who aren't fundamentalists.
Right.
With this view of forgery. And that's why it's the mainstream view. And the evidence is so conclusive that there isn't any rational, reasonable defense. So that's why only fundamentalists try to defend their authenticity.
Of course, yeah.
Whereas liberal Christians have to admit, they're forgeries, but it was accepted to do a forgery. That's the apologetic.
Sure.
Like this was a completely acceptable thing to do, is for a later Christian to write in the name of Paul. No one thought that was a bad thing. And one of the things Ehrman does is thoroughly documents that that's complete bullshit. That, in fact, the evidence is overwhelmingly to the contrary, that forgery was bad. No one thought that this was an acceptable thing to do. That, in fact, they did it precisely because they wanted people to think Paul wrote those letters. That was the whole point. And so it is an act of deception, and you have to admit that it constitutes a form of lying. And that's the hardest thing for liberal Christians to admit, is that there are liars in the New Testament, in their own scriptures.
Yeah.
Right.
It's unfortunate that Ehrman did such a good job on that, because he did such a poor job on some of the other historicity issues, some of the actual books he wrote on historicity.
Yeah.
Well, only on Jesus, right? I mean, that was
Jesus, anyway.
You mean, did Jesus exist?
Yeah.
right on the historicity of Jesus.
Yeah.
As a earthly.
Yeah, he completely flubbed that book. Ehrman does two different kinds of literature, and he does them well. One is where he communicates the mainstream consensus, where he just he basically says, this is what I was taught. Basically, says, this is what I was taught in grad school, and we all agree that this is the case, and this is why. And then, so any scholar goes up and says, yeah, you're right, that's what we teach, that's what we think. So you could disagree with it, but you can't disagree with the fact that, yes, that is the consensus view at the time. So, like Jesus Interrupted, which is a really good book, Forged is another really good book, where he's just presenting what the field has been advocating for ages, and he does a really good job of communicating that to the lay public.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of his stuff. I mean,
Right.
actually, it should be known because there's actually quite a bit of talk in the comments as well about how you hate Bart Ehrman so much, which I think mainly comes from Bart Ehrman's comments about the way you speak to him.
Yeah.
But I mean, after the last show, we sat here and watched some Bart Ehrman lectures for a while, and I mean, I'm a huge fan. I've learned a lot from him, and I know you agree on the majority of the stuff he says, but on the historicity of Jesus, as you mentioned, this is something I hear not just from you. I mean, this is something
The
I hear
Christians
from.
use it against the position against.
Well, I've heard. Yeah, I mean, that's the point I was getting to, is that I've heard a lot of Christians also admit. In fact, Trent Horn, I think in the debate, he even admitted himself. Yeah, when it came to the historicity of Jesus and Bart Ehrman's book on that,
he couldn't.
it was
Right.
just it was
This,
just
is,
there was
this,
something
is a,
there.
this
yeah.
is a distinction that Trent was able to make, but a lot of Christians are not able to make.
Sure,
Right.
yeah.
They think that because he argues so persuasively and so well
On other things. Yeah.
that his views should also be followed when he's talking about the history.
Right, yeah. I mean, there's that issue as well. But I think the main thing is when he wrote that book, there wasn't any mainstream scholarship really for him to communicate. So that he kind of had to make it all up, essentially. Like he had to do original research to actually do a proper rebuttal to the current state of mythicist literature, as he was doing. And that's, but he didn't do that. So he just basically, it looks very clearly that he just threw this out that, like, from the desk, like a 2-week job. He just spun it out just from his head without doing the kind of research that you should probably do for it. And that led to him making a lot of mistakes, which I caught. And then some of those mistakes he tried to lie about making to try and save face on. And then other mistakes he's not responded to at all. And so that, I think, to me, the one thing that the problem I have with Bart Ehrman is that he just can't admit that he hosed the job, that he made these mistakes. And then he makes it all about the fact that I speak the colloquial language of the common man, and I use words like suck.
Right.
Which is a very elitist argument. Like what dialect I speak doesn't have nothing to do. It has nothing to do with whether you made these mistakes or not, right? So there's that aspect of it, and he just doesn't want to address it. Doesn't want to confront these mistakes or the lies he told. And I documented also that he told that they were lies. Like he made these lies, and I said, no, these are lies, and this is why I can prove they're lies. And that argument is in it's in my.
I'd hate you too.
Right. Just don't lie to me, and you'll be.
Yeah.
You'll be good. But that's in my Bart Ehrman recap article. If you Google Richard Carrier Bart Ehrman historicity recap, you'll get my whole summary of where the state of the question is. But the thing is that there's no reason for him to have done that. It was just kind of arrogance and assumption that he could get away with doing that. Because the other kind of books he wrote, like I was talking about the first kind, which is popularizing consensus to the public, the other kind of book he does is thoroughly researched, original, new information for the field. Like when he did Forged, a lot of that was communicating the consensus stuff to the public, but also he did his own extensively thorough research of this, and he came out with an academic book called Forgery and Counterforgery, which is like basically the definitive book on forgery and counterforgery in the ancient world. Like he did extremely thorough research on it, it's well documented and all of that. And that's an example of when he can do really good scholarship, but he worked really hard at that, spent years on producing that book, right? He didn't do that for historicity.
But you mentioned there's no reason for it. I think that might be the reason for it. Since he did all that other stuff and made such a great name for himself, it's so easy to just toss the other stuff out, you know?
Yeah,
he knew he was going to make money. He got money for it.
Well, that's hard to speculate on why he did what he did.
Yeah.
No, but it's easy to.
Well,
I think
it's
for him,
fun to.
I think he just assumed it was obvious, and therefore he could be like, with the things he was saying were obviously true. He doesn't think that he had to check. Right? And that's where he went wrong.
That's a good point. That comes up over and over and over again in the comments of the debate that you were in with Trent Horn. A lot of people here are just stating. I mean, how could he even say this? What a tard. These are comments.
They're using words like tard. Automatically,
no, really.
Must be wrong.
Right.
Really? Yeah.
Wait,
because that's what everyone else. I mean, all the other scholars are saying that Jesus existed. You know, how can you even say? You're just like a creationist. You know?
Right.
So we talked a little bit about this time. We don't have to get into that.
On the last episode, we covered that.
Yeah. I mean, it just keeps coming up though. So yeah, it's that's something that often comes up. But I think we actually skipped, for those that might be interested and still don't know. Again, the decades later on the Gospels. Well, first of all, when do we think that Paul's letters were written, and what is the earliest manuscript that we actually have
Of Paul?
Right?
Okay. Well, Paul, the 7 authentic letters of Paul, which are 1 and 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, 1 Thessalonians, Philemon, and what was the other one?
Philanthropist.
Romans. Sorry.
Oh.
So those are the 7 philanthropists. There should have been one.
Yeah.
That would have made more sense. One philanthropist.
Jim, it's okay.
Could follow that up with fallopians.
Let's come up with names of books
Really?
that we think should have been in the Bible.
1 and 2 fallopians.
Yeah. Stay professional, you guys.
They're written in
We're
the 50s.
following your.
Written in the 50s, most likely.
Okay.
All the internal evidence suggests they're written in the 50s. And the earliest that a gospel could have been written, incidentally, would have been the 70s. That's the Gospel of Mark. There could have been gospels before that, but we don't have them, so we can't date them. And it looks like Mark may have been the first. It's entirely possible. In fact, I think it's more likely than most people think. But the earliest gospel we have that we can date the writing of it, the earliest it could be is 70s. Mark could have been written later. It could have been written in the 80s or the 90s, but it couldn't have been written before the 70s. So we got 20-year span of difference there. Now, for the manuscripts, the earliest manuscript of Paul, that's what you're asking about, is a different question.
Right.
Earliest manuscripts of Paul would date around 200 AD-ish. And I think in that case it's all fragments, like pieces,
right.
Like maybe a couple sentences, not even a whole letter. But after that, like I think in the 3rd century we have a few complete letters or near complete letters. And the earliest complete New Testament, which doesn't agree with our New Testaments, it has different readings in different books, would be 300 to 350 AD. We have a couple Bibles, complete New Testaments from that period. Two? When I say couple, I mean literally we have 2.
And Jesus supposedly, the earthly Jesus character, he supposedly died in like 75. So this all matches up, right? I'm sorry. So that's very difficult for a lot of people. These are not eyewitness testimonies.
Yeah. Oh, that's another. You make a good point though. Is that the latest? If Jesus was killed by Pontius Pilate, as the Gospels claim, the latest he could have lived would be 36 AD.
Right.
So Paul's letter is 50s. That's 20 years after that, even.
Now,
it's the earliest documents that survive for us to read about the Christian movement. That's 20 years. Is a long time.
What do you know about the lifespan of people in that era and that location?
That's something I talk about in the book because it's relevant to a lot of these aspects. The average life expectancy for an adult, someone who survived childhood, is 48.
Okay.
So that means there's a 50% chance you'll be dead by 48. And then once you get above 48, your odds of surviving drop precipitously.
Because 20 years today doesn't seem like an extraordinary amount of time.
Yeah, it is a long time, by the way. But it is a more meaningful time then when people are dying half as young as they are now. Like now, our average lifespan is 80. It's in the 80s. So you have a 50% chance of surviving to your 80s, and that's twice as long, right? So you have lots of people who are elderly and can talk about things that were happening 60 years ago.
Right.
Whereas back then it would be extremely hard to find someone who could talk about something 60 years ago.
Right.
I think for the age of 80, I think it's like 1 in 200 people survive that long. Something like that. I can't remember the exact number, but it's 48 is the average compared to today, which is like 85 or something is the average lifespan. For someone who survived childhood, most people die before they may do that. Most people die before the age of 18 in antiquity.
To get down to something really basic, but also seems to be quite a bit unknown, what language did Jesus and his disciples speak?
Well, we have to assume that if there was a Jesus and he was teaching disciples in Galilee, like it says in the Gospels, they would have been interacting in Aramaic. And Aramaic is a version of Hebrew. Hebrew is kind of like the formal elite language of the Bible. Aramaic was kind of like the common version of it. And so they're very similar languages. So they would most likely be communicating in Aramaic.
Okay.
Whether they would know any Greek is entirely possible, but it's not something we can determine from the evidence we have.
And the Gospels and Paul's letters were written in Greek.
In Greek, yes. And in fact, not only that when Paul quotes Scripture, he quotes the established Greek translation of Scripture. So he's not even translating himself the Hebrew Bible.
Right.
He's communicating with his church communities using the Greek Bible, which means that they were using the Greek Bible, so that they weren't even communicating in Hebrew. They were basing their whole religion on the Greek readings, the Greek translation of the Old Testament.
Of the Old Testament.
Which is significant because that means the Christianity that we know from Paul appears to be a diaspora religion, a religion outside Palestine. It does not appear to be a religion that was mainly based in Jerusalem.
And diaspora, just so that...
Diaspora, it means it's when the Jews were scattered, when Israel was conquered by various... has been conquered multiple times, or was conquered by multiple times with different enemies. And Jewish communities were either taken away as captives or fled or whatever, and so they established communities in other cities around the world, around the Mediterranean, outside the Roman Empire, and so on. And this is called the diaspora, where all the Jews live in those areas. When Jews created communities in Greek cities in other areas, they generally started assimilating Greek culture and started speaking Greek. So that you come to Greek communities of Jews that they wouldn't even know Hebrew anymore, so that they had to study their own scriptures in the Greek translation.
Did they change their theology at all when that happened?
That's a complicated question, and I'm not the one to ask that. I would have to go through my Rolodex of experts on that subject to recommend for that. But
all right, well, go ahead. And we did the phone in
Skype in.
We did the phone in last time. So.
I was reading an interesting book written by actually a friend of a local person here who was talking about the story of Exodus potentially having been a story that was told by the Jews in Babylonia to explain to explain basically the diaspora.
yes,
And maybe
that's a
you know something about
plausible
that.
theory. I haven't examined the evidence for and against it, but that would be a credible origin story for that. Yeah.
One person here in the comment section of the video from your debate with Trent Horn said Richard Carrier presents decent argument except for the writings of Paul. The only way his argument I'm reading this as it's written. The only way his argument works as if you make an interpretation about everything, you have to make Jesus' brother James not his literal brother. Mm-hmm. You have to make the seed not a literal seed. You have to make the flesh literal flesh. This goes on and on.
Yeah. Well, you don't have to do half of those things, but because God can actually literally manufacture someone out of the literal seed of David. God can do that. That's not a problem. So you don't really need,
Noted.
Yeah. So you don't need that.
I've always been skeptical about what God can do.
Yeah. Well, and the idea of Jesus becoming flesh, that's all part of the theory, is that Jesus did become flesh in the lower heavens so that he could die, and therefore his sacrifice could create this atonement effect, basically create this magical spell that would permanently dispel all sins from everybody. So you can actually have literal flesh, it's just they thought it was happening in the heavens rather than on earth. So what you need is, you need a passage in Paul that clearly places these events on earth, or that, for example, in the case of the brothers of the Lord, that clearly states that these are biological brothers and not cultic brothers, because the evidence is clear. I mean, it's not even speculative. It's absolutely the case that all baptized Christians were adopted sons of God and therefore would have been brothers of the Lord, the Son of God, right? So all baptized Christians would be brothers of the Lord. The fact that Paul doesn't even know that he has to make this distinction suggests that no such distinction existed yet, which means there were no biological brothers.
Right.
So that's the argument. So this isn't something you just pull out of your ass. This is something that the evidence actually leads you to when you actually look at it.
People often bring, before we get into the rest of this, people often bring up, we were speaking on eyewitness accounts, and
Right.
there are a couple extra biblical sources that people always bring up. I wonder if you can talk on those just briefly for those that don't know.
Yeah. Well, the three you'll hear.
Because James comes up and
You mean Josephus?
Right.
Yes. Oh, and James and Josephus.
Right.
Yes. That's probably the one to talk about then.
Yeah.
I mean, there's Thallus, which didn't reference Jesus at all. There's Tacitus, who wrote so late that even if the passage is authentic, it's not useful, because he's just reporting what Christians were telling him, and if he even wrote that, which there are reasons to suggest he did not. But if you get to Josephus, again, you have the same problem that the only manuscript or the only text that mentions Jesus or James as a brother of Jesus was written in the 90s, long after the brother of Jesus was as invented as Jesus was, right? So if he's relying, and actually the Testimonium Flavianum, the one longer paragraph that looks ridiculous in Josephus, it's not the James passage, but the other one. There's two passages in Josephus, and there's the one that looks absurd. That one that's been shown is based on the Gospel of Luke. So whoever wrote that, whether it was Josephus or a later Christian inserting it, was using the Gospel of Luke as a source. So if the Gospel of Luke is bogus, you can't use that to independently corroborate the Gospel. So it's not usable as evidence, even if that was authentically Josephine.
Because it was just simply based on Luke.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And similarly, you have the James legends could have existed by that time to affect Josephus, but we can actually show from the evidence that we have of references to the manuscripts of Josephus in antiquity that the James passage did not have a reference to Christ in it originally. Because we have, for example, Origen, who was a Christian scholar who wrote around 230 AD, loved Josephus, used him and cited him a lot, goes through Josephus in his argument with Celsus, an enemy of Christianity, and tries to reference and cite all the passages in Josephus that refer to Jesus or anyone connected to Jesus. And when he gets to the James thing, he says, well, Josephus refers to James, but then he cites a completely different story and a completely different author who happens to be a Christian author, and it's not Josephus. So we can show that Origen could not find this James passage that's in Josephus. He had no knowledge of it. Then about 50 years later, Eusebius, using the same library as Origen, suddenly finds this passage. So it appears that passage was entering the text sometime in that 50-year span.
Right.
But we can show this from the evidence that it clearly was not there in 230, and suddenly it was there in 300 or 315. So that's why you come to this conclusion that no, Josephus did not refer to James, the brother of Jesus. Josephus was talking about a different James that was unconnected to Christianity.
What is the scholarly consensus on Paul's writings of Jesus? Is there a consensus that he was speaking on an earthly Jesus, or is there one way or the other, or a celestial Jesus, or...
Well, it's mostly, historicity is just assumed, right? It's just the standard assumption in the field. So everybody assumes Paul is talking about a historical Jesus.
Got it.
However...
Because it comes after the Gospels, so...
Well, and it's funny that you say that a lot of scholars do assume that you can interpret Paul in light of what's said in the Gospels, based on the assumption that the Gospel's content predates Paul. It just took a long time to get to the Gospels. It's really hard to actually establish that, but that's a common assumption. But it is an assumption; it's not something that can be proved.
Right.
But with regard to Paul referencing things like that, when I did the book, I actually looked for all of the studies that I could find, all the articles by experts analyzing the letters of Paul to try and prove references to historical Jesus in them. And I cite a number of different scholars, and all of them had to concede, well, he kind of doesn't clearly ever refer to a historical Jesus. And so let me come up with a bunch of reasons why that is. And so they try to explain it away rather than just confront the fact, you know what, maybe there's a much simpler reason why he's not referring clearly to a historical Jesus, that there wasn't one. They don't go that leap. So
or that the time and place that he was writing...
They're getting halfway there.
Clearly not where Jesus was.
Right.
So, even if there was, this guy writing just isn't aware of that.
You mean Paul?
Paul.
Yeah, right. But how could that be? Because he knows the original apostles. He talks about meeting them and so forth in Galatians, for example. He's writing to a number of Christian communities that have all interacted with these apostles. So it would be impossible for him to not know if there was an actual historical Jesus. And that's actually significant in terms of you can show that would have affected the kinds of arguments and the ways that he would have to defend himself to his enemies in the letters. And yet those defenses don't appear. He doesn't seem to ever have to defend himself on scores related to a historical Jesus.
Huh, that's interesting. You also have to say that woman is Eve instead of Mary.
Oh, that's a weird one. I wonder, was that something Trent Horn maybe have said?
I was hoping you knew
I'm
what he
I
said.
don't think St. Paul said that.
I'm assuming that's a confusion where they're referring to Galatians 4:4, where it says that Jesus was born of a woman. And one of the arguments I gave was I explained that the word, first of all, it's an allegory. Paul says it's an allegory, and that we're all born of the same woman. So he's not talking about Mary anyway. But one of the arguments I pointed out, I think, in that debate, because it's true, is that the word he uses for born is not the word that Paul uses for human birth elsewhere in his letters. It's the word he uses for divine manufacture. When God manufactures Adam out of the clay, when God manufactures our future resurrection bodies, that's the word he uses. So it's not actually, to Paul, it's not a word that means born, it's a word that means manufacture. Divine manufacture in that particular context. Later Christians were so aware of this that they actually tried to doctor the manuscripts to change it from that word to the word that Paul uses for born elsewhere, so that they can try and get Paul to say born when he wasn't really. So they were actually aware of the fact that that was a problematic passage. So somehow this guy's confused that with Eve, I guess. It doesn't quite connect up. I mentioned Adam, therefore I must have meant that Eve was the mother of Jesus? No. Okay. That's my best hypothesis on that one.
So, you're not doing that. Oh, yeah, here's one. I don't know how someone can debate did he exist or not. There's overwhelming evidence.
Overwhelming?
Welling. Yeah, overwhelming.
Okay. I'm sure he got T9'd.
Yeah, overwhelming evidence, actually, to keep it going. Evidence that there was a person by the name of Jesus that he should be debating is the story matching strongly to pagans that come before his time. Sorry, this is difficult to read. There's a lot of misspellings. Which there is
difficult
over
to follow conceptually.
a second time overwhelming evidence but saying he didn't exist is plain out wrong, and everything is in sport for this person existing. Jingy. I think I read that correctly. Yeah.
It's like reading hate mail. Let's just read some of our hate
you
mail.
know what?
Your response.
Just in general,
Okay.
like if you care enough about something to write a comment, especially one that's that long,
I mean,
fucking spell check. You know, like,
don't be dismissive, Richard. Obviously, this is an academic.
even so.
You can't dismiss him just because he uses words.
I mean,
like,
it can't be because right. But it can't be that he doesn't know how to spell these words. Clearly, he does, or she.
Wait.
I don't know if so.
It looks like a he by name and picture.
Okay.
Well, he perfectly misspelled them exactly the same twice in a row.
Yeah.
So it's confusing. But
Right. Right. I'm not entirely sure what
don't worry about
going
it.
for there. But,
that's just
Now,
one of those comments you can't really even. They
Yeah.
come up to us at the booth sometimes,
Well,
and
they
they say stuff like that.
Yeah.
And
You're
I
like,
just
you don't
look
know
at
what.
them. I don't even respond.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Because
Now, I'm curious though. Is it when they're referring to the pagan precedents?
Oh,
Does
yeah.
it sound like they think that I should have argued that the whole Jesus story?
Right.
is
So this
based
comes up a
on-
few times. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some people thought that was your position because you're a mythicist. Some people
Oh, I can't remember how much that came up in the debate because there's an
I don't know
aspect
that
of that, but
was.
uh,
Anyways,
yeah.
but then a lot of people, I hear this argument, especially in the atheist community.
Mm-hmm.
I hear it a lot of times that Jesus and everything else. It's just all it all has pagan roots or it's just all repeating some other god. And while some of that seems to be fairly plausible and likely, people seem to think that that's just the slam dunk. That it's all just pagan stuff before, all pagan, not anything else, just
Right.
pagan.
That bothers me especially because almost all of it can be explained as fabrications based on Jewish precedents, not pagan, right? So most of the made-up stories about Jesus are based on Elijah and Moses. We talked about that in the last episode.
Right.
And almost all of the gospel structure is based on things they're getting from Scripture. I'll take that.
I don't even know why you're using those.
I'm already pissing off the Scotch lovers by throwing ice in here. So.
Okay, granted, now a little bit of ice is fine. It opens up the flavors.
We're
and
trying
aromas.
to equally
But
offend
that's a
everybody
lot of
by
ice.
the end
That's
of
a
the
lot. That's
podcast.
all we're saying.
Is there anyone else that we can offend? Because We've got some time.
We haven't talked about Islam yet.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh, I want to draw a picture right now.
I do too. And
Yeah, that just
I
My wife might kill me first.
You don't have to worry about terrorists.
Yeah.
Yeah. But people do often ask me, can I apply this analysis to Muhammad? Because does Muhammad exist? And there is a guy by the name of Spencer who did an analysis of the Quran based on theorized Syriac originals, where he was trying to argue that Muhammad was a fabrication as well.
Really?
Yeah. However, this view has not been thoroughly vetted by actual experts in Islamic studies yet. There's been some critiques that I find semi-persuasive, like, okay, there's problems here that need to be addressed. So I consider the question unresolved at this point. I myself am totally unqualified to weigh in myself. All I could do is just tell you what the experts are saying, because I don't have Arabic languages. I don't have medieval Arabic studies background. So someone who has those things would have to go in and do what I did and just look at all of the arguments on both sides and say, well, what makes the most sense?
Right. Well, I don't know how someone can debate did Muhammad exist or not, because there's overwhelming evidence.
Oh, that is funny, the overwhelming part, because we were talking about the last episode.
Yeah.
There's not. There's really it's just shreds of terrible stuff.
I don't understand
it's the worst evidence you could have for someone. And then I was speaking for Riverside atheists. Thinkers just the other day. And one of the questions was, based on that, was the idea of, now I forget where I was going with that, but...
Well, we do that all the time.
Real quick, Raft, the Riverside Atheists and Free Thinkers, and I feel terrible right now. I've only communicated with her via email. Jennifer Ramirez. She's been doing a ton of great work in Riverside County.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Yeah.
For fighting the good fight. I was giving her great praise on that. Yeah.
They really had the things on the ball.
She's been really consistent. They've been doing a lot bigger things, a lot more often. I see
it was a well-organized event. Like, that was the thing, is like that's what I complimented it on, is like, you know what you're doing, you put on a good system. So that was very good. But yeah, there were questions about that, like the evidence. And it was Socrates. That was what I was going for. Is that someone asked, like, well, how would my methodology in this, how would it affect Socrates? Would it end up refuting the existence of Socrates? And I explained, like, that we actually have tons of really good evidence for Socrates. A lot of people don't realize this, because often this is used as an example, like, well, we have no eyewitness accounts of Socrates. And like, well, actually we have two at least, and we have two complete books written by his own disciples. Plus, we have lots of contemporaries referring to him of the period. We even have, like, one thing I pointed out, we have a satirical play making fun of him by a contemporary who knew him, and the play's first production had Socrates sitting in the audience to see it. Now, can you imagine if we had that for Jesus? Right? Like, that would just tell us so much about if we had something like that. But we don't have anything like that.
But that whole argument misses the point anyway. Because whether Socrates actually lived or not makes no difference whatsoever to anybody that has read about
true.
But there's the behavioral.
So it misses, to make that argument misses the entire point.
Yeah.
Well,
they're attempting an argument.
When most people make the argument. I think it might be slightly different.
They're attempting what's called an argumentum ad absurdum, which is trying to reduce my argument to the absurd effects of it.
Right.
The consequences would be we would have to deny the existence of all these people that everybody else accepts exists. And that could make sense if we had really good evidence for Socrates, but that would only make sense if we had that same evidence for Jesus, and we don't.
Right.
And that's where it falls down, that you can't actually make that argument. So.
We have a question on Twitter for you. Dr. Carrier, how did you get to be as awesome as you?
He tried out. He actually tried out to be him. They do this all the time in Hollywood. I know this. That if they decide to make a sitcom or some sort of thing based on you, they will interview you, and oftentimes you will do a pretty good job. but someone else will actually be
Yeah,
better.
someone else will get
And
the part.
that has to probably have killed at least a dozen people.
You don't need to worry about answering,
somebody is better at being them than they
It
are.
always happens. I already answered in many ways because
I'm
I
wondering
know a
who's
thing or
better
two
at
about
me.
being awesome. So
Well, I mean, in terms of
you're awesome.
if we just reduce that to a more mundane question about how did I get all the education and skills that I have, we did talk about that in the last episode.
We did,
so,
actually, yeah.
So anybody who's not seen
Yeah, they
that
should
episode,
watch the last episode.
That's right.
See
Yeah,
episode
Answer
one.
that
absolutely.
question.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, subscribe
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or just watch.
and keep watching Patreon in case we ever get on there.
Why wouldn't you be?
Well,
We're lazy.
Oh, okay.
That's actually the only reason.
Now I understand that. Right. Yeah. I know. I totally get that. Yeah.
Lazy.
it's impressive that you did.
I wouldn't even talk to you without
Yeah.
scotch.
Yeah. No,
I love
it's
that.
doubly so because I've created a Patreon account and I want to start using it, but it requires a lot of planning and preparation. I have to get
Right.
an action plan in order and actually work it out so I can dedicate time to it every month. And I've been so busy that I haven't been able to do that. The funniest thing is about the busy part is that I'm doing a lot of traveling, a lot of speaking on the subject and various other subjects wherever I go. But it's happening so often that I'm having problems where I'm forgetting which pieces of information or steps of the process have been dropped. You know what I mean? Like different things. So I need to create like a proper process track, like a tracking mechanism for all of the events that people have asked me about or planned and so forth, so that I can make sure each thing has been done in time before it happens.
Yeah.
But I'm so busy that I can't create the process track system
Volunteers?
that I need in order to
Is
help
it
myself being so
Richard
busy.
Carrier
.info.
.info? Volunteers? Any?
But yeah, so it's that sort of catch-22.
The work is mundane, but the pay is dismal.
Truly, unfortunately. Yeah,
important,
that's the other downside of it is I make too little money to afford to hire assistants. But yeah.
Another question on Twitter. I'm reading on historicity of Jeebus. I read that correctly.
Yeah, and they specifically
Jeebus.
spelled it that way.
We gotta do
Jeebus.
just a hate mail
This,
episode.
I don't think this is a believer.
No, it's a Simpsons fan. Is what
Yes, it is. Any parts you'd revise, change in light of reviews and criticism?
Well, I have a zillion typos in the book that I need to fix. Not
but-
significant examples.
No.
There is one passage that I would like to have addressed in it. It's so trivial, it's not really important, but it's one that's attempted to be used.
Okay.
There's a passage in Paul where he says that Jesus has been tempted in all ways like we have been. And then there's been an attempt to argue that means he must have been an actual human who walked around on the earth. Now, getting from
seems
A
weak.
to B on that is really hard.
Yeah.
So it almost doesn't even have to be addressed. But it would be
I don't
nice.
think so.
I want the book to be thorough, so I would love to throw that in there. I do have a response to that.
It's big enough. You can
Yeah.
put it in.
A future edition. Yeah.
Yeah. You're going to have to give me a minute to get to the other question here. Sorry. Oh, I remember what it was, though. Do you plan, the question was, do you plan to write a book on ancient science?
I do and have done, actually. I mean, I've written one, I just haven't gotten it published yet. I've written two, and I haven't gotten them published yet. The thing is when 2008, when I got my PhD, I couldn't get a job. We talked about this in the last episode because the economy collapsed and no one was
Right.
hiring humanities PhDs. So I went to my fans to get a research grant from them to do a project, and that was this project, The Historicity of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been doing this for the last 6 years, and therefore I'd had to shelve turning my dissertation into a series of books. Those books are basically written, but they've been on the shelf for 6 years, so if I'm going to publish them again, I need to go back to the library and update them, because there's going to be new research done in the field of ancient science in the last 6 years. So then that's going to be work. So I would have to work at developing them. But it's something I want to do, and I may get done before the end of this year. I'm not sure. So yeah, those books will exist at some point. And the two books are Science Education in the Early Roman Empire, which is a book
Ooh.
about the role of science. Firstly, it's a book about the whole education system, what it was like, and who got to go into it, and what benefits they got from it.
Do we know
Focusing
a
specifically
lot of
on
details about that?
Enough to write a whole book about it. Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah. So how much science content was in that education system, and I include in the term education system not just the sort of formal system, but also the informal ways that information gets disseminated. So like today,
what was put out there on Twitter.
Yeah, like today, a lot of people learn things from TV shows, right?
Right.
You might learn lots of stuff that you didn't learn in school, but you'll learn it from a TV show.
Right.
Or in things like that. And so I do talk about all the different informal channels through which scientific knowledge would disseminate to the public. But the main focus is on the formal systems of education, and also all the way up to how much science was not only in the ordinary education, but what kind of science education did scientists receive? So I cover the whole gamut on that. And so that was part of my dissertation. I had to do that for my dissertation because when I got to that point in all the books on ancient education that had been written, almost all of them would say, and science is so different from the rest of this stuff that we're going to skip that and just talk about the rest. And so it was like, I wanted to do a chapter on the scholarship on science education, but everyone before me had said, that's something separate, I'm going to put it aside, and no one went through the process of doing it. So I had to actually do it for my dissertation, and so that will become a book at some point. The other book is The Scientist in the Early Roman Empire, which is a book about the role that scientists played in the Roman Empire. What did people think they do? What did people think of them? Did they like them? Did they hate them? What were the opinions of them?
I want these books.
Yeah, right? They're great books.
I want these books.
I mean, I've not only have I written them, but I've read them multiple times. So I know they're good books.
So they don't have all the typos in them.
Oh, you'd be surprised.
Yeah.
To give you an example, we had about typos. I've done chapters in several books with John Loftus, and we did a series of 3 books, which just finished. This last year, we did the last one, based on the 4 horsemen, although the 3 main horsemen.
Right.
And the first one was the Christian delusion, based on the God delusion, where we got a bunch of experts to write about, because one of the main criticisms of like Dawkins and Harris is like, oh, you're shooting fish in a barrel, you're picking the easy targets, you're not dealing with the so-called sophisticated things, or you're not experts on these subjects, and so on. It's like, well, actually, we can totally shore up what they say by bringing experts in to explain to you how it works. And so the Christian delusion is we got a bunch of different experts to talk about different aspects of this. And focusing on Christianity specifically, because that was easier to do. And so we had a Christian delusion, and the next one was the end of Christianity, which was based on the end of faith, which expanded on that. And then Christianity is Not Great was the one that just came out, which is based on God is Not Great. And that one just came out. But
these are actually I must
We got to get these books.
I must admit slightly less creative than porn titles.
But then again, we've learned a lot from porn that we didn't learn in school.
I learned more from porn than I did Lee Strobel.
Wow, is that true? That is sad but true.
Yeah. No,
very
sad.
true.
Sad because I read Lee Strobel.
It's sad for all reasons.
It's sad even if it's not true.
I've never been sad with porn.
No, it is. I was going to say it's sad that Lee Strobel can't put more information, more valuable information in his book than
I was just pushing to clarify.
Porn, but like, if porn is more informative than your book, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
So we did these books, but and I've helped sort of uncredited as an editor, like a co-editor, helping him do typo corrections and stuff, and doing a lot of vetting of things. And we did so each one, and it's constant. Every single time one of these comes out, we do multiple draft reviews. Like we're pouring through everything to catch typos. And we do it like I do it like 3 times and catch all the typos. He does it 3 times and catches all the typos. It goes to Prometheus Books, which publishes these books, and they have their own editor go through and catch all the typos, and they have their own typesetter who goes through and catches all the typos, and then the book comes out and there's fucking typos.
Yeah.
And it's like, and we all missed them. Through all that whole process, so you just can't get them all.
I realized it when I finally did that. There's that little mind trick where you can read, full paragraph, full page, and every single word is misspelled. They mix up the letters in between, and you can perfectly read it.
But
no problem.
Your brain is fixing it in your head.
I do that so many times, writing emails out. I reread it, and then I send it, and I look at it. you're kidding me. You
Yeah.
know? It's just there's the
Yeah, and I know enough about that phenomenon that sometimes if you read it in a different medium, like if you read it versus on screen versus print, you'll see things you didn't see. So I do that as well, and still,
yeah.
and I do that, and I do catch, like I realize, like wow, I'm missing these typos on the screen version that I'm catching in the print version, and still I'm missing things in the print version.
And then there's a couple other things. You know, the more words it gets, once you get into a book, you're screwed. There's just so many because if it's just one sentence, you can read.
Yeah, but if it's 100,000, 200,000
like
words,
this, and you'll catch everyone.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
but it's a book. Forget it.
It's true. It's true.
The other thing is, I've found recently, you know, my phone, just as I'm typing it, tells me I'm typing it wrong. You know, and I expect my computer to do the same thing, and it doesn't do it. And so I'll go through thinking everything's fine because it didn't tell me, you know. So different, so like you said, different mediums, you know, you use different things, and certain things will tell you right away or automatically change it for you. Because sometimes, like on my phone, I know I missed a letter there, but I'll just keep typing space next to the word because I know it's going to auto-correct it for me.
Yeah.
Which causes some other issues.
Right.
But this is all important. Back from the commercial break. Now a completely personal question.
Very informative if you're watching and you're an editor.
Yeah,
right.
This is the
the
MABOOM Show editor version.
We should apologize right now. We're not going to edit this. Again, we're lazy. So the personal question, every time I speak to, well, especially you, and but any historian, I love history. I didn't grow up religious. I was never indoctrinated. I've read the Bible an embarrassing number of times because I find it fascinating. I find it fascinating not because it has great poetry, as some claim, or because it has great wisdom, as some claim, or great moral teachings, as some claim, and so on and so forth. But it is such a fantastic and I mean, as far as I've personally read, incomparable view of what, unfortunately, only men, not all people, but only men thought at that time. What they believed, how they governed, how they wanted to govern, how they lived their personal lives, how they wanted to live their personal lives. Because there's differences there. And I just find it incredibly fascinating. But so I do love history. I don't think I could be a historian without committing suicide. And the reason is this. Every time I start to dig into something, I immediately have to stop because it frustrates me so much that, like, the Library of Alexander is not still there.
Right.
At all. You know, I mean,
the loss.
Oh, it is. It
God, if
kills
it frustrates you, the thing how it frustrates me.
Right. So that's why I want you to talk on this.
My main field is the ancient science.
Right.
So
I literally I love history. I can't stop learning about history, and I know nothing about it. Because as soon as I start learning about any particular thing, I have to stop because it freaks me out that we don't have all the information.
Yeah. It pisses me off.
Yes.
It doesn't freak me out. It pisses me off.
Oh, yeah.
For me. There's so many things, because it happens so often where you're digging and digging and digging to get to a point where, there's this book that wrote all about that, but we don't have it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. That's the thing, because there are records that we had records.
Yes. and we know, of course, that's just happenstance in itself. So there were records that we don't know about as well.
Of course,
So the fact that we know, like, someone just casually refers to this book that you really desperately want to read but didn't survive.
Yeah.
You know there's many other books that people just didn't happen to reference in the things that just happened to survive.
Yeah. So many things that you don't even know that you're pissed off about that you don't have.
Right. Yes. Exactly.
The unknown unknowns.
Right. Oh. That's why
I think is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it frustrates the hell out of me a lot.
What frustrates me is that they then turn around and present things as if we do know, as if we do have this knowledge. That's the amazing thing to me. And then hordes of people buy into that. So,
well, like the overwhelming evidence Evidence.
Evidence.
Welling
Overwhelming
evidence
evidence.
that Jesus existed.
Because surely everybody at the time referenced Jesus.
Well,
Yes.
everybody,
Obviously that
everybody
happened. That must have
did
happened. I don't need to
reference
check.
Jesus
How would it
at
not?
the time, and stop calling me Shirley.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's problematic. It's problematic.
So thank you for doing it because I can't deal with it.
Yeah, see, that's the thing is that's frustrating in the sense of pissing me off, but the thing that would probably drive you out of history, and then I'll comment on this if anybody wants to.
Is my IQ?
No. No, come on.
There's not much to comment on.
Right. That would drive me out.
No,
It's a short conversation.
Yeah.
getting all the way to completing a PhD in history
Mm.
is you have to be really passionate about the subject because otherwise you're gonna get tired of it at some point. You won't follow through. Go for it. And I'll tell you one of the reasons. I'll give you an example of this. Like when I was doing my dissertation, which was the title was I'll translate it into common person speak, which is
Please. Translate it into modern Aramaic.
yeah, which was the scientist in the early Roman or attitudes towards the scientist in the early Roman Empire. The actual word is natural philosopher, but what that means is scientist.
Yeah.
And of their version of
Right.
scientists. So attitudes and from 100 BC to 313 AD. That's the subtitle. So I had to research basically everything there was we know about scientists of the time, including science education, which led to that chapter, which led to that book on that. But most of what I did for 11 years, maybe a little less than 11 years, it was 11 years to get the degree. I wasn't working on this particular dissertation all 11 years because you do your master's and you do your other graduate work before you start your prospectus and all of that. But still, it was like at least 9 years working on this dissertation. Most of what I was doing, like I'd say 99% of my time spent in libraries, 99% of my time was spent in libraries confirming all of the articles and books that don't have any useful information for me. So it's like most of what I was doing was confirming like, yes, this is useless.
Right.
You know, so like most of what I was doing is just confirming that the information didn't exist.
Yeah.
Because you have to, and that's the thing is like if you're going to write about this subject, you have to have read all the literature on it so that you can so that you didn't miss anything.
Yeah.
So most of what
Just
I'm
in case
doing,
this had.
yeah, like someone writes a book on some subject, oh, okay, I have to read that.
Ugh.
And so you skim through it to see if it has anything relevant to your dissertation, and you confirm that it doesn't.
We just sent so many people away from ever making a life in history.
Now, let me turn that around into a positive.
Oh, thank goodness.
I'll turn it into a positive.
Almost said thank God.
Yeah.
It would have been weird on this show.
Gods, you're supposed to go plural.
Yeah. Thank God.
I'll turn that into a positive. All of that stuff, I learned shitloads of other things that weren't related to my dissertation just from doing that. Because if you're skimming through and looking through a book or an article to confirm whether it has anything relevant to your dissertation, you're learning a lot of information that's in that article or book.
Right.
And so I learned, so all of the stuff that makes me a really good historian today is based on that. It was stuff that I didn't expect to find because it wasn't relevant to my dissertation.
Right.
But I ran into it anyway, just through this process of confirming that it didn't have anything relevant to my dissertation.
Right.
But there was a point, like about year 8 or 9, where I did turn to my wife Jen and say like it's like most of what I'm doing, like I came back. It was from a particular library trip, which I spent like 8 hours at the library and found nothing. and I came back and I'm looking at books and articles and it's like most of what I am doing is confirming that there isn't information for me to use in my dissertation. And that I realized that's what a historian. That's mostly what a historian does.
Yeah.
But so you have to be passionate about the subject so that all the shit that I learned that was irrelevant to my dissertation was fascinating to me, and it was enough to fuel it and keep me going. So you do have to be passionate about your subject to do history all the way to a PhD.
See, I don't think I'd be able to.
A lot of people
do
couldn't.
that.
Yeah.
I mean, well, maybe if I was that passionate about that,
Yeah, you got to have that. Otherwise, no.
I think it's probably true of just about every profession that if you don't really love it, that it's not going to be worth it to go through this.
Well,
go through the pay the dues you have to pay.
Yeah, right.
But, well, let's take a 5-minute break. We have to do a card change. So.
We should have done this earlier when we were dicking around about other things. Sorry. So we are editing this.
Well, we're just going to end it right there
Yeah.
and then start it up whenever she gets the new card.
Okay, good, because I got a new question.
So.
Well, see you after the commercials.
I don't think this part will be in. I think
Brought to you by
Edit
No,
it
Glenn
out.
Levitt.
Oh, yeah.
What we're gonna do? We're gonna do an incredible magic trick. We're gonna teleport into the future,
Ah,
and the audience is gonna watch this happen. It's
let's
gonna
edit
be
the last
amazing.
5 minutes out. And okay, so now we're going to try teleporting because
And we're
science
back.
works, bitches.
Because
Yeah.
if you build a rocket ship using science, it goes to the moon.
I feel like I should say bye to everybody, but could you just change the card? Stop it. Go ahead, stop it. I don't.
Don't pay any attention. I don't know why she pays any attention to us. She just keeps rolling until she runs out of